Welcome back, graph enthusiasts, to another exciting episode of GraphStuff.fm. I am your host, Jennifer Reif, and I am joined today in the studio by fellow developer advocates, Andreas Colliger and Jason Koop.
Hello.
Hello, everyone.
So Neo4j just wrapped up the fabulous Nodes 2023 event last week. And since we at Neo4j are still running on some adrenaline and maybe just some caffeine, we'd like to recap our thoughts, our favorite things, and all the technical goodies from the virtual conference. Let's dive right in. Does anybody want to start?
Yeah, so I think the first obvious thing about Nodes is just the absolutely epic kind of broadcast of it. Like this 20 hours from like multiple time zones. It just kept going, and it was just like every hour there's great material, incredible depth of like knowledge of all the speakers who were there. That still to me like the takeaway still is like, oh my god, like just the people like in the community, all of the speakers. It was just such an amazing, like kind of overwhelming to some degree event. And I know that like as I was trying to get through some of it, and I couldn't, like I'm sure we should probably maybe next year like actually have like some kind of like challenge, like who can actually watch the entire thing end to end. I'll have to confess that I didn't. I had to take breaks. I had to take naps to kind of get through it. But like then it's like, okay, now there's like things in my head, and I'm trying to write down like things to go back to like in the playlist once the recording's available, right? Did you guys have like the same kind of experience? It's like, oh my gosh, awesome, kind of overwhelming, right?
Well, and I'd be curious too, how many attendees actually watched across time zone segments?
Yeah,
like those in the Americas track. Did they also watch the EMEA track or some of the APAC track, and vice versa? How much overlap did you have between tracks, or do people pretty much stay within their regional time zone kind of segment? I know I kind of bridged a few different gaps. I logged on for the first part of the APAC track late Wednesday night, and then I actually was speaking at the end of the EMEA track, and so I kind of was around for part of that, had my session, and then stuck around for some of the last couple. And then I was online through all of the Americas track. So I would be curious how many attendees also had that, if they kind of bridged the segments or not. But it was a lot of content. And for those that maybe didn't pay attention, the end of the APAC track, you had a short break, and then you immediately started the next like EMEA region segment. And then at the very end of the EMEA segment, you had like a few minute break, and then you immediately started the Americas segment. So it was nonstop, back to back to back.
Yeah, it was a lot of great material. Like even though we had put in breaks, it still felt like, constant back to back, great sessions, great information. Yeah. And for a lot of the sessions, I was the same as Jen. I caught, the beginning part of when we opened up in APAC, and then, switched over to early morning America. And the whole time, like, I felt like, oh, you know what? I could sit listening to this speaker for much longer than the time slots, right?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
So much great information. Did anyone have, well, I know that we all have like favorite sessions, and there were a lot of great sessions, but was there one or two sessions that really stuck out to either one of you?
Well, of course, there was the fantastic Q&A sessions with Emil. So little plug for those, of course. Those are fun. But for the material, and of course, we touched on this with Emil, and it was kind of the subtext of almost everybody's talk was, of course, the world is all about Gen AI and large language models and all that. And there's so much about that in each of the sessions. But then, like the particular session that I loved, of course, because it's replaced a lot of my internal kind of like focus, actually, I would say, is this whole thing that we had done with Docker and LangChain and Olama that we announced at DockerCon. What is it? It feels like just last week, but it's a couple of weeks ago already, right?
Yeah.
The Gen AI stack that was released, and there's that session with Harrison Chase and Oscar Hanna from Neo4j talking through, okay, let's kind of review what is this Docker Gen AI stack thing, like how do you actually get into it? And even though I've heard that material before, like every time I listen to those guys, it's okay, I get a little more nugget of information about like how they're thinking about it, like kind of how it all formed together, and like why it is the way it is. And I love the takeaway, of course, from it, which is where everybody is doing so much with Gen AI everywhere, trying to figure it out, right? Like both technology people, but everyday people. And certainly like for programmers, like you kind of know this, some of the basics of this stuff is easy enough. Okay, we've seen ChatGPT, fine. You've heard this term RAG. Okay, intellectually that kind of makes sense. But does that mean you can just pop into a terminal and just like, open up a new directory and just kind of start creating something? Like there's so many things where like, I know I could do that. Like I can just initialize it, get in it something, maybe start a JavaScript project, maybe a Java project. I know how to do that. Can I just kind of fire up a Gen AI project? Not really. Like I definitely would be doing a lot of Googling for it. Yeah. And so like the Gen AI stack is okay, that's git clone this thing, Docker compose up, and then bang, you've got kind of like a running system. And I remember the first time that I did that, because I kind of caught up with a lot of this stuff, I was almost intimidated by like the whole language learning model part of it. Like, okay, how, like you hear like these things are giant, right? Like, I feel like, okay, you must have only like a data center to run these things, and you can only tap in through an API. But then when you spin up this stack, right, a couple of Docker images spin up and these containers spin up, and you're like, oh, okay. The model itself, like this, you can pull these things down, different versions of them. You can just have that running on your laptop and like get great results and actually get kind of an understanding of like how the flow works. And I'm sure I'll keep talking about this. I'll stop myself from talking about it. I'm so excited about like, okay, it makes it possible to just kind of dig your hands into it and just start, experimenting, which I love. So I love the stack, and I loved having the talk about it because it makes me feel more comfortable. Like, okay, smart people put this together to help us do stuff, and like now I feel like I can kind of do it myself also.
It could help provide a nice on-ramp for those who are new to it, something where they don't have to dig into a lot of the weeds and try to figure out how to assemble the pieces. It's already kind of pre-built. You can start messing around with it and then customize or tweak or adjust or swap things out as you need to after that point.
Yeah, and it's kind of like a kitchen sink demonstrator, right? Because there are 5 applications inside. So if you want to know how to do any one piece, you just dive into that part of the code, and you can, take parts of it and couple it back together, or, make it your own. Yeah, it's a great single resource to reference, right?
Yeah.
And do you guys feel like from a developer's perspective, like it makes it more kind of accessible, I suppose? It's the obvious thing, like Hugging Face is the obvious place for now, where like a lot of the model stuff is being shared, and there's a lot of great information there. But like as a developer, when I go out to Hugging Face, I'm like, I don't know what that stuff is. This is all so there's so much for me to learn there, and there's so many long lists of things. Like I don't even know, like, where do I just start? Like how do I grab stuff? It's such a different experience. Like it's so far out of my comfort zone from like I can pop over to GitHub and like kind of look through some repositories, and like I can understand what to do with all that stuff. But like Hugging Face was like, okay, that's for machine learning people, totally get it. For a developer, I'm intimidated.
Yeah.
But okay, so what are the other sessions? I'm sure Gen AI will come back up in our conversation. Like, what else did you guys listen to or watch?
I listened to, Sadir's roadmap and product announcement, which was a great summary of like everything Neo4j related for the whole year, right? Including the 2 major product announcements, the parallel runtime and the change data capture, right? So it was, if you haven't been keeping up with, all the product updates and all the sort of features that have been released over the last year, that was a great talk about that. Just kind of summarized everything that kind of gets you back to level set 1 of, okay, where's the Neo4j at right now? What is in version 5 that makes it outstanding versus the previous version? And what are some extra features that you can look forward to, or like you might not have thought of, right? Like, oh, Neo4j can do this now. It's like, yes, it's so I thought it was a great, like, if you didn't, if you only knew parts of the graph, or you didn't know Neo4j at all, I recommend watching that session to get right up to like, okay, I know now what our capabilities are at this stage.
There's an aspect of that I want to call out. One is Sadir isn't just some random dude. It's our chief product officer, right? So like he gave us one of these talks, which is fantastic to have him involved along with the rest of the community. And the parallel runtime, I guess change data capture also super impactful, but like parallel runtime kind of from the outside sounds like one of those nice, okay, that's cool. You now have a parallel runtime. Shrug, like, why do I care? like, okay, and then we know why you care, because if you're running particular queries that can be parallelized, it's going to be, much more efficient. It's going to be awesome and, faster in lots of ways. But there's also this dimension where this kind of simple, like, okay, you don't change anything in your Cypher queries. They all just magically become faster, which is great, right? So from the user's perspective, you don't have to do anything to take advantage of it. And parallel runtime is one of those things. Okay, it's not quite the same as AI, but how AI has been like chugging along quietly for the last 30 plus years. And it's been like, yeah, good luck with that stuff. It seems like a really hard problem. You're never going to get to the end of it. And then bang, it lands in ChatGPT, and like the world is like, oh, apparently that's a thing now. Like it's actually exists, right? Parallel runtime has been a hard problem to solve well. Like it's not easy to just do that. That's been at least 5-ish years, maybe longer, of engineering that has been building and building towards this thing. So there's been elements of it kind of always within Neo4j, but it's been a long road with a lot of people kind of really doing hard work to like get to this point where like now, oh, here's a thing we just did that's going to be invisible, right? Like all these engineers spending all this time doing solving hard problems for something that for the user ends up being kind of invisible, but just like, oh, thanks, everything's better now. So shout out to the engineers. Thank you for all the work that's gone into that. We know the work that's gone into that. People who are using Neo4j, you're going to want to upgrade just to get the parallel runtime. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, and I did want to make just a quick call out. We were just talking about this before the session started, but our keynote speaker was fabulous. It was awesome to listen to her. And even though we don't have recordings of that to distribute, she has a lot of content out there, including, I think, regular podcasts that she's part of talking about data. So even if you didn't catch the keynote, be sure to check out her stuff. She's a fabulous speaker, really engaging, talks a lot about data and just some of the really cool things that are going on in the world surrounding data and its analysis. So definitely check that out. I want to kind of give a quick shout out to that before I charge on. The other thing that I really enjoyed throughout the day, I kind of hopped back and forth between the tracks, even inside the America segment, and some of the others as well. But there were two kind of cybersecurity, I guess, talks that ran, which I think is relatively new. I haven't seen a whole lot of cybersecurity stuff. We've got a little bit of content here and there popping up, but there were two, and they were both really interesting. One was looking at dark web analysis, so pulling in data from the dark web into Neo4j and doing some really cool things on that for research at, I believe it was at a university. Anyway, really interesting session there. Kind of neat to see some of the tools they use as well as things they're trying to do with it and all that. So, and then the other one was incident response. Again, pouring the data into Neo4j and figuring out how to respond to events, cybersecurity events. And that was really neat as well, just kind of getting an in-depth look at their use case and what they were doing with it. So those were kind of two, I would say, less common things that popped up. And I was really excited to see and really intrigued to hear their stories.
That's really fantastic. So just as you say, like, I don't think I've delved into that aspect of people using Neo4j for those kinds of things before, cybersecurity. And like that's part of the both the breadth, and for all of the breadth, everyone who's speaking across a broad range, the depth that they got into. And like, I didn't catch those sessions, but it sounds like, that's kind of typical. It's like, okay, I haven't thought about that before, but other people certainly have. Super smart people have, and they're using Neo4j to good effect in cybersecurity. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I caught any of the cybersecurity sessions, but there was one session, I believe, by Jim Thornton, who used Neo4j to kind of track his web page that his company runs. So, most of us think of a web page as kind of like this sort of hierarchical or sort of, page to page journey. But he was saying, actually, it's more like a graph, right? Because each page links to so many other pages, but different parts of it link to different parts of other pages. And so when you map it out into this networked web, you get a better sense of like exactly what your entire website looks like. And he had gone on and built a tool, I believe, that looked at page rerouting, right? So when you had a deprecated page and it was forwarded to another. And so he had all these tables and this interconnected web of what old pages had where they were funneling, and then using that as part of discovering truly what the user journey was over time, and what was kind of driving the most viewership on certain pages. So I thought that was a great way of looking at.
I remember seeing that session on the schedule and thinking, "Oh, that looks so interesting," and that was one I didn't get to get to listen to. So I guess I'll have to wait for the recordings to come out.
Yeah, definitely check that out. And that was definitely one where I was like, wait, you could talk for like another hour, because this is like, he's going very fast through all the slides and stuff, and it's like this is highly interesting. And there was completely different, but there was one session by an instructor out of China. And she was talking about how she was using graph data modeling to teach the students. And she had these great images of the students with like these giant like vinyl sticker nodes and like relationships. And they were putting up on the blackboard. And so they were physically like noodling data modeling before she transitioned them to working on an actual digital system to work out some problems.
Oh, cool.
So that experience and her learnings were also really interesting to watch.
That's really cool.
Hands-on with the graph, physical nodes. This goes here.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Didn't we used to have like a fridge magnets or something that
we did? One of our developer relations conferences or sessions, or I don't know what it was, but like we definitely had like a sheet where you could break out of the sheet like different arrows and different nodes, and then you could kind of assemble your own graph out of it. So, and each of those things were magnets.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know about that. Now I feel like we need to revive that.
Yeah, we got to bring that back. I need some of those.
Yeah. Cool.
Along that same thread where you're talking about kind of education, there was one, I believe, PhD student that totally new speaker, and she even said at the very end, she's like, "This is my first time speaking, thanks for listening," and all that. But she wrote a TypeScript integration for Prisma, or is working on it. It's still kind of in progress, and she was just kind of showcasing what she'd done so far. But I thought it was really neat, first of all, that she had kind of developed this basically side project, and then secondly, that she was getting out for the first time and speaking about it to such a huge audience, and what may seem to some be very intimidating. You're getting up in front of possibly thousands of people. You've never spoken before. This is kind of a new project for you. It's not quite 100% completed or finished, in her eyes, and to get up there and present and showcase what she had, and for people to really encourage her and to thank her for doing this, I think was really neat and just kind of really inspiring and encouraging. That this is why we have events like this, to kind of encourage people and to help them and show them that, yes, please do build these things. People need this, and we'd love to see those community projects out there. So I came away from that session, maybe I'm not a TypeScript person or a Prisma person or anything like that, but walking away from that session going, wow, this is really cool. And I'm so excited to see this vibrancy in the community and kind of the inspiration going on. It makes me want to do more.
Nice.
Yeah, totally.
It's amazing. Speaking of, I guess, community projects, that might be a good segue into kind of our community project of the month. There's a project called AD Miner, which was just put out recently. And so this is in the cybersecurity space, like you had mentioned earlier. And so what AD Miner is, well, I haven't run it myself, but just looking, at the repo and looking at some of the resources on it, it's this great sort of visualization tool for tracking cybersecurity threats. So it stacks on a couple different things, Bloodhound, and I think another piece of technology. But anyways, so not only can you graphically look at some of the kind of the threat assessment, but it's also got this sort of card tabular view of a bunch of charts that shows the status of various systems over time. So you could see if one part of your system was, I don't know, collapsing or, becoming riskier than another, or if performance in one area was declining or getting better. So it's cybersecurity in general is kind of outside of my wheelhouse, but still, if you take a look at the repo, which we'll have a link to, just the screen grabs alone, like, oh, this looks very cool. And like, you can see different pathways of how your systems are interconnected.
That's cool. Maybe this episode should be renamed to something about cybersecurity.
Cybersecurity, totally.
A lot of that coming out. Yeah, I'll definitely have to check that out.
Cool. Yeah, give it a go. I think it was. Let's see, this came out. The latest commit was last month, so it's like brand new.
Okay.
You've now totally distracted me. Now I'm just looking through the GitHub repo. I'll get back into the conversation later. I'll be right back.
Yeah,
it looks like a nice tool.
Yeah. At first, I was like 80 miner. I was thinking, I was like, is this like, some sort of like Bitcoin thing? And then, after we oh, okay, it's in cybersecurity space. And so, which actually reminds me, I didn't get to catch their session this time, but Chad from Intuit, I believe, gave a talk on, so him and Zach, I believe, have been working on the security audit tool that they use at Intuit. And it's different than AD Miner, but it's basically a configuration-based system for tracking all the dependencies across all their microservices, so that whenever there's a known vulnerability that comes up with one of the systems, they're immediately flagged and they can go talk to the implementation team and go like, hey, please update, that dependency.
Nice.
And there's much more to their stuff, but that's the gist.
I was gonna say I might have been in that session actually. I'm trying to remember. I think I was. Yeah. So yeah, that one was interesting.
Cool. Okay, community projects. Let's see, product updates. So
wait. We were going to do the tools of the month as well.
Oh yes, do we want to do that now? Yeah, let's do that now. Okay. All right, Jen, what's your tool of the month?
Okay, I'm going with Spring AI. So my session at Nodes, we did some analysis. We looked a little bit at Bloom with Neo4j and some other things. And we kind of thought, when all this kind of Gen AI and Gen AI stack and everything kind of broke loose a little bit ago, like, hey, I wonder if we could, use Spring AI, because that was like really, really new. I want to say they released it relatively recently. And then I think our Spring Data Neo4j team was working on some things not too long before Nodes to integrate with that and so on. So we actually kind of pulled in a little bit of Spring AI. It's still very rudimentary. It's in beta phases, so it's not like a solid out of the box support just yet, but we kind of just played around with it and kind of dipped our toes into it, and kind of some pretty neat things. I definitely want to dive more into the retrieval augmented generation, the RAG sort of things, which is what we did by pulling data from Neo4j and sending it over by prompt stuffing to the LLM Spring AI and then getting responses back based on that data. But I want to do a little bit more with kind of the vector side of Neo4j and some other things that are involved there. But yeah, just kind of some really neat things that I'm starting to interact with and get involved with. And it's just kind of really neat to explore. So that's mine for the month. Spring AI.
So Jen, Spring AI has been on one of my tabs open as like, okay, that's something I got to get back to and take a look at.
Yeah.
So is this like kind of like the Java version of what, most of AI stuff is happening in Python land, right?
Right.
So this is like the Java version of either LangChain or Llama Index. Is it kind of comparable to that, or?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's supposed to be kind of like a drop-in for those Spring users who are already, have the Spring Boot projects and all that. It's just another dependency you drop in, you get access. They have implementations of OpenAI as well as Azure OpenAI. So both of those are supported, but you get access to that, and it's just through they've just got a Spring, I guess packaging is the way you might want to frame it. But yeah, it's I think like a drop-in replacement for LangChain or some of the others out there, and all Java based. So you're interacting in a Spring Boot app. It's very familiar for those Spring developers to utilize it that way.
Nice.
So, and they've got a few vector databases that are already up, Neo4j being one of them, that you can use with Spring AI. There's a couple others, and I think they're supposed to be integrating some others as well, but their documentation is not quite filled in yet. So there's not a whole lot of like deep dive or overview segments on all the different topics and stuff. But yeah, they're getting rolling with it. So it's pretty cool.
Completely fresh and new, like everything else.
Yeah, we're all learning together.
Live code commits are happening now, breaking changes on a regular basis. But
yeah,
it's kind of fun. Carrying forward, of course, the AI theme, and for me, it's still a Gen AI stack. And one part of the Gen AI stack that we had, of course, this is the Docker containers with Olama for kind of local LLMs if you want to, and then LangChain is where we were just doing a lot of the work for building the app itself. So LangChain being a Python-based version of Spring AI, or no, whichever way you want to say that, whoever came first, okay? They're in that same territory. Here's abstracting out the kind of the data sources and interfacing to the LLMs. And along with that, kind of what happens is, like, if you've done any of this stuff by hand, like you're working with ChatGPT, and like there's the whole idea of like prompt engineering and like people getting their own expertise, which is super critical, right? Like you have to learn, if you're talking straight to the LLM, sure, you can just have a chat with it and build a relationship and become its friend. Sure, you can do that. But if you're getting it to actually do work for you, then it's not always so simple. And so there's these patterns that emerge, and you realize, like, okay, you've got to set it up like, hey, you're an expert on European history, whatever it might be. You've got to help the LLM along and coach it, right? Yeah. And so like these interface layers, like Spring AI and Llama Index and LangChain, kind of have best practices. Here's the patterns that emerge from doing that. Here's how you want to do the prompt stuffing, as you said it, Jennifer. And so along with that, though, like, okay, so the framework is taking care of some of the, it'll take care of like creating the prompt. It'll stuff in what, is necessary for the context, the user input, and kind of construct it all in a way that the LLM knows how to deal with it. Well, if you're just using the APIs, it just like calls something with your results. Even if you're doing RAG, like at least in LangChain, you kind of just hand it over to the LangChain, and LangChain just makes magic happen, and then you get a result pops out, right? Okay, what the heck just happened, right? Is one of the big challenges, right? So one of the tools that I like that's still, I think, in beta, it's not generally available quite yet, is from the LangChain folks. They realized that's an issue, and so they have a tool called Langsmith that they're working on, which is like a debugging tool for doing RAG and other patterns of interacting with the LLM, so that once you've set stuff up, you basically have the ability to trace from the initial, like, okay, here's the question. Hey, I need some embeddings for this. So can you help me with that? And then, okay, here's the original user question. We've combined it with a vector lookup, and then maybe a graph database query or something. Like all of that, there's different things that LangChain is taking care of. And in Langsmith, you can actually watch the flow and you can dig into the details. So it's like, okay, I was going to say like looking through like a stack trace or something, but that's not quite right. But you get to see kind of like when something goes wrong, you're not sure why the answer came out. You get some visibility into like, okay, here's what was actually sent over to the model. Here's what the model gave you back. And if there's a couple of steps, you can kind of follow along there. So basically, because you still need to do some level of debugging, because even though like LangChain helps you out with all that stuff, sometimes things aren't quite going the way you want to. And so you have to understand, okay, well, why? And it's all behind this, kind of magic curtain right now.
It's opening that black box a little bit.
It is totally right. And it's funny, like it reminded me a little bit of some earlier days of like Spring, sometimes like with like the kind of annotation based programming, I'm going to call it. Like magic happens here because you've annotated. And like you sometimes have no idea what the heck just happened. And like you have to be really careful about like how you're actually orchestrating stuff, even just in code. And so, of course, it happens with LangChain and large language model interactions as well. So Langsmith, from the LangChain folks, my current tool of the month that I love, notably, it has replaced arrows in my heart.
For this month.
This month. Arrows might come back next month. I might realize, actually, arrows is the best way to do all of this stuff.
It can open the black box of LLM for you.
It's fantastic. And for Langsmith, people, so it's a sign up process right now, right? It's not, I think, a public general release. So you got to sign up, and when you are given a key to the golden garden, then you can start using it.
Yeah.
Cool. Also Gen AI related. My favorite tool of the month is Cody AI. So Cody is basically a similar to GitHub Copilot. Their VS Code, Visual Studio Code interface integration, I thought was really good. So I actually switched off my GitHub Copilot temporarily to try out Cody. You could probably run both simultaneously, but I figure one AI system at a time is best. And so it's like Copilot, right? It'll give you code completion suggestions, but it also gives you inline chat ability, right? So you could click on a line of code, or you could highlight a function and then go, hey, Cody, give me a better version of this, or check it for code smells. Or what I use Cody a lot for is to generate my unit test for me, because, as much as I keep telling myself like, okay, I'm going to go back to TDD. I'm going to build my test first and then build my function. Unfortunately, like most developers, 80% of the time, it's like, okay, I'm not even sure what I want this function to do yet. So I'm just going to build it out. And then once, it's all fleshed out, it's like, okay, this is what I want these function or these now 3 functions to do. Just click on the function or the whole class, the whole file, and go like, okay, Cody, write me a bunch of unit tests. And the unit tests are pretty good. There are some edge cases that'll miss, but in general, of the different AI tools that I've used, the unit tests that Cody produces are really the closest to like, oh, okay, that's at least you got, the name of the test and what the test is doing. Like, okay, yes, I should totally test for that thing. So I can go in and tweak the actual test, but at least it got all the high level things that, I should look for. So if you're not already using some sort of AI assistant while coding, I do recommend, Cody or GitHub Copilot. Both of them I've found success with.
Is Cody independent, or is that from Microsoft or somebody, or where's that from?
It's built by SourceGraph, and if I remember right, SourceGraph has been around a while, and so if you look them up, you have to kind of look for SourceGraph Cody, because if you look for just Cody, at least the last couple times I've looked, like the AI doesn't show up, but if you put SourceGraph Cody, then it immediately pops up.
Might be a lot about people in Montana who ride horses.
Well, okay, so one big thing between Copilot and Cody for anyone looking. So Copilot you need to pay for. Cody right now is in an open beta, so it's completely free. And so far I've not hit a limit on just like random questions I've asked it. So yeah, if you're looking to try out a tool that doesn't cost you anything, Cody is definitely something to take a look at.
That sounds really nice.
Yeah, I might have to check that out too. I like this tools of the month section. We always come up with several things. It's like, oh, I haven't heard of that. I need to look at that. But of course, that means my list of things to look at is getting longer and longer and longer.
Right. Yeah, especially now, right? There's so many tools popping out. There was the second runner-up for my list this month was a service called Make, which is this sort of API integration ETL tool. And so it is graphically built. Right. So you create like, okay, here's an input source, API sending to whatever your target source is. And when you are mapping, this is my favorite part because I've been looking for a tool like this forever, is mapping the data from the input to the output integration. So it'll hit the endpoint and give you all the key values from the payload or even the header. And you can click and drag that property over to your output and you let go and it'll just map it. And so when you run it, that value from the input will go to whatever your target output is.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, nice.
Right. It was
So
like,
it doesn't it does do some auto mapping for you, but you can customize that a little.
Math functions, string functions. So you can do a good amount of ETL on that data as it's coming through. You can even split data. So they have like this router thing, right? So when data's coming in, you can route it to multiple endpoints. Like it just like the visual execution of this, I was like, oh, this is way better than programming, integration, a very brittle integration that only works for as long as either side has not updated their APIs.
Right.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm gonna have to check that out too. Add it all to my list.
The list just keeps getting bigger.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Okay. Well, we'll switch over to product updates. We talked a bit about this already earlier when we were talking about Sadir's session at Nodes. So the big ones that we didn't mention actually was a vector search, right? So that came out recently. And in a nutshell, I've been describing it as, you can take information in a graph database, right? And basically pull, it's not quite the right analogy, but like you can pull like a vector representation of it and then use that in a different system, right? So you could pull that and use it if you wanted to put it into like a vector database and have this sort of like two different DB stack to, kind of power your system. Is that the best way to describe it? ABK? I don't know.
It's really one way to think about it. I think the way I've started to think about these things, and it's I think keying off like the index aspect of it, you can think about it similarly to how you think about Lucene indexing, or even the spatial indexing for that matter, that if you think about the vectors themselves, that's just a new data type. And kind of putting aside like all the machine learning stuff, it's just, here's an array of numbers. And you can stick these numbers into an index. And what it creates is this vector space. And so what a vector space is, and the analogy I've been using there to think about what that is. And so putting aside LLMs, all that stuff, and even like Neighbor mode, right? Like if you think about colors, right? We're all pretty familiar with like color spaces. We know what RGB is, CMYK. There's all these different HSL, right? There's these different representations of colors. And each of those different representations are just vectors. It's like, oh, okay, here's 3 numbers, an R number, a G number, and a B number. That's going to place this color into a space, a vector space, right? And the beauty of the vector index is it says, okay, great, all the things that you know about, it's not a contiguous space. So we think about colors being contiguous, right? Like, okay, you can tweak one number and you get a slightly different color, and that's fine. But if you instead think about all the colors as being swatches from color palettes, okay, this Benjamin Moore paint bucket, color orange, like has a particular color. Okay, turn that into the numbers, put that into the vector database, and then, okay, if you have some other color that has its same, comes from a different manufacturer or whatever it is, but ends up being the same color, you want to know how similar are these things, right? So because they're all just been turned into just numbers, you can visually try to identify them, of course, but the database now knows. The database can now do a lookup because this set of numbers is these 3 RGB numbers, and these other 3 RGB numbers are very close in the color space. So we've seen color space diagrams before when you're doing the color picker. That's the same thing as being in the vector space, except now you can compute the differences. So you know that those 2 numbers are actually very similar, or those 2 vectors are very similar. And that's how you find similar vectors. And then once you realize you can get similar vectors, whether it's colors, or you've taken a document and turned it into a vector, pulling out entities, pulling out meanings, pulling out structure, all those things. Each of those things end up turning into a number. You get a bunch of arrays of numbers. Stick that into the same index, right? This index doesn't care what you've given it. As long as you've given it kind of arrays of numbers, it's good at figuring out which arrays of numbers are similar to the other arrays of numbers. So winding all the way back to like why this matters now for language models, it's because when we talk about large language model embeddings, the embedding aspect is exactly this. That's I see the color orange, give me the numbers that represent that orange, right? That's the embedding aspect right there. Instead, it's for language. So, okay, here's a PDF, turn that into a bunch of numbers. Great, thank you. That's the embedding, that's the vector number, and then that goes into the vector index. And so that's what lets us do all this fun lookup stuff. And the reason that I say like it's nice to focus on the indexing aspect of it is that the kind of logical operation is different. Like that's the kind of physical operation of what's happening. The implementation detail is you've got some numbers, you compare them to some other numbers in different ways and decide how close they are. But then logically what you're doing is you're doing semantic similarity. You're like, okay, because of how, hopefully, if you've done a good job of representing those, the document or whatever it is, that you'll have things that are semantically similar when you ask for things out of the index. And so on the logical level, all you're saying is, hey, I've got this question, for instance, like in the QA kind of context, you embed the question, and that question should end up in the color space or the vector space near the answers. You're like, okay, just give me the things that are near that, pop those back out, and then that's your answer. But the logical operation is just a semantic search.
One really cool example.
Go ahead. Yeah.
One really cool example, I actually saw this that kind of solidified this in my mind, was that you can calculate, like, let's say, countries, languages, etc. And the example they said was you can now start aggregating and subtracting and calculating based on these vectors. Right. So for instance, if you had, Germany and France and Paris, and you calculate all those vectors and you say, okay, I have Germany and France and Paris, take France I think it was Germany and subtract Paris or something like that. What do you get? You get Berlin. Because, okay, now you have Paris, France, and you have Berlin, Germany. And so when you start you have, it must have been maybe France minus Paris, and now do the same thing with Germany, etc. But anyway, it was really cool because now there we go. Lost sound for a second. Now we can start doing subtraction on entities that you would never be able to turn into a mathematical problem. But now that you're here calculating this string of floats that you can store in the database, you can now run these calculations and say, okay, what's, Germany minus Paris? What am I left with? You get Berlin, or something like that. So it was just really interesting that you can turn these very non-mathematical things into mathematical problems. And that's helping, like when you ask that question to the LLM, it knows, hey, okay, I kind of know this trajectory because I've already got the pattern of, city, country. And now when you give me another country, I can look for the capital city there. So just really neat kind of assimilating that to something, I guess, that's a little bit more human sensible.
And now that we've got this NIFRJ like as an index, what's awesome is like you can do all those things, but then you still have all the rest of your data. It's like, how when we do pattern matching in NIFRJ, we love to like kind of anchor our patterns, like, okay, a place you're starting, or maybe a place you want to end. And now you can get those kinds of places you want to start and end from the vector index. So rather than knowing exactly where you're starting, like, okay, I'm starting over here, but then I kind of want to get things related to that. And which will even help you refine those answers you might have gotten out of the vector database, right, or the vector index. So you might have gotten things that are great candidates for the answer, but then now that you've got kind of factual information in the database and kind of the graph, you can then say, okay, yeah, these things, I understand why they're calculated as being similar or semantically meaningful, but we know that actually some of them are more important than others, right? We know that I don't know, like. What's the classic recommendation example is like, you're looking for a place to eat and like, you can just get all the recommendations for like, what's the best place to eat near me? Okay, there's that. But then where's the best place to eat near me for me? Like, I don't care if the rest of the world says McDonald's is the best place to go to. That's a bad answer for me, right? So do not tell me, dear LLM, do not tell me I should go to McDonald's, right? But the way to solve that then is like by having knowledge about yourself, and that's what you get out of the knowledge graph, right? Because then you get it personalized and customized to the context.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jason, that was a huge sidebar. like the first bullet of your product updates.
Yeah. No, it was great. Okay, but yeah, we'll have to speed this up the rest of it. So parallel runtime, which we did talk about a little bit before, but also just to kind of put this into context, right? Because I think all of us know what parallel and what multi-threaded means. But so in the context of Neo4j, right? So there are kind of three main elements, right? There's the defining what is the word? Query parser, right? So when you put in a query like Cypher, there's a system that parses your command. Then there's the optimizer, which kind of creates the kind of the plan for deciding how to hit the database. And then the runtime is the actual execution part, right? So when we talk about parallel runtime, this is one of several runtime options available through Neo4j. The other being, I think, slotted, which is used by community, and pipeline, which is the default for Aura and Enterprise currently. So
isn't there a cost runtime too?
A cost runtime?
Yeah, I thought there was a third one, but maybe I'm misremembering that.
Maybe there was an old interpreted runtime, which I think was the very first one.
That might have been it.
Which the slotted runtime is also interpreted, but it's a more efficient one.
Okay.
And I think it does a bit of cost-based analysis. I think you're right. So it could be the slotted, one aspect of the slotted.
Okay, so that's parallel runtime. Change data capture. We'll run through this one really quick as well too. So this is, I think, for developers, this is kind of equivalent to like a outbound webhook being fired from a system, right? So with CDC, you can track two types of change, right? So anytime one node has updates, I think the entire data payload related to that node will be sent off with the CDC trigger or event. And then you can also choose, which I think is cool, you can choose a diff, right? So only the change in that node is sent over, is streamed off. So you could, based on either system, you could build an interesting tracking system, right? One, using the diff obviously is going to be more performant, more efficient, but you got options. So that's CDC in general. I think it's already built into the Kafka connector. So if you're using that, you don't have to enable anything. Okay, some GDS updates, which since we don't have Allison, I don't know if these are like recent ones or just kind of been around for a little while that we haven't talked about. One is finding longest path, and the other is topological sort. I'm not going to go into either since this is, I don't know. Okay, yeah, we won't spend too much time. But so those are two updates that you may want to take a look at, and we'll put links in if you want to jump into those. Okay, next section, we got quite a few articles that were released recently. Jen, I don't know if you took a look at these earlier. Are there like maybe just like 3 that really jumped out at you that people should look at?
Well, we did already talk about the Gen AI stack. So the article and kind of getting the kind of behind the scenes, how to build it, how it works a little bit. It's not super dive deep walk through kind of stuff, but very technical, kind of walks you through the stack and what it all kind of is assembled and where to find the resources and get a hold of it. So there's that out there. Some of the other stuff, I haven't dug into that, but there's also a new parallel runtime article sitting out there on Medium. So if you haven't checked that out yet, feel free if you want to dig into kind of the details on parallel runtime and such. There's that out there. There's also an article out for a DevTools update, workspace multi-DB editors. There's an update on Needle, which I believe is also a Neo4j thing, correct?
Design system, right?
Right. Okay. Yeah. So many terms throwing around. So that's out there. That's Neo4j specific if you're interested to see some of the details there. And then there's some stuff on LangChain Neo4j for enhanced QA. There's a GraphQL development best practices article out there and some other things that I'm sure, are sitting out there as well. So.
Again, harking back to Nodes, the Nodes playlist is available on our YouTube channel. It has just a few key videos that were streamed live during the event currently up there. But as we process the rest of the recordings and the rest of the sessions, they'll all be put into that playlist. So definitely check out that if you're wanting to see a recap of the conference. And upcoming, we've got quite a lot of events coming up in November.
Fall is always busy conference season.
And
so conference in London, for November 1st. And then it also is on the 2nd as well. The Perfect Couple, uniting large language models and knowledge graphs for enhanced knowledge representation. And then on November 2nd, I'm actually hosting, along with Alex Ertl and a couple of guests, we're talking about test containers with Neo4j. So that'll be a really fun, that's coming up on November 2nd again. And then a hands-on lab in Munich on Google Cloud Generative AI hands-on lab with Neo4j. So that's in Munich on November 8th. And then also on November 8th, but on kind of the opposite side of the pond in Texas, USA, is a conference. And the session there is Migrate, Modernize, and Transform Your Databases with Google Cloud. Again, November 8th there. On November 9th, there's a Graph Talk Munich on the topic of pharma. So if you're interested in that content, check that out. On November 14th, there's a couple of conferences, Scale by the Bay in California, USA. And I've done a virtual event there. That's a good conference, but I think that's a in-person conference this year. And then a Neo4j Graph Summit London. So we go all the way from California back to London here on November 14th. And so check those out. November 16th, there's a meetup for Graph Database Sydney. And I'm not sure what the topic is on that one. It just had a kind of a placeholder for the event. So if you're curious and in the area, check that one out. November 17th, we're at DevFest Singapore. And the topic there is Gen AI and Graphs with Google Cloud. And then there's also a meetup on November 17th in Delhi, India, or just outside of Delhi, the Data and Gen AI Nexus. So check those out if you're in the APAC region. November 21st is Graph Summit Paris. And then November 23rd is Graph Talk Barcelona. So back into Europe there for the end of November. And then on November 27th, so closing out the month, we have AWS reInvent in Las Vegas. So that's a massive event. So that'll be in Vegas this year. And then FEMA in Europe, that's out of London. I did actually, when I clicked the link on this one, they have a US version as well as a Europe version. So this is the Europe, it is out of London. So if you're curious with that one, November 27th in London for that. And I think that closes us out for events.
Jen, what's that acronym, FEMA? I don't know that one.
I had to look that up. It was
Federal something.
It is, well, yeah, data
I'm thinking
management.
of the US FEMA.
Financial Data Innovation, but that's not FEMA.
Yeah, so FEMA is spelled FIMA for those listening, not FEMA, which is the...
Not Federal Emergency Management in the US. Right? Okay, it's not that. Okay.
Yeah, they don't, on their website, they don't even list it out. They say FIMA, FEMA, and then their little tagline is Financial Data Innovation.
Okay.
They don't explain it.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
data management
ChatGPT.
community, financial information management. There it
Ah.
is. Had to go into their about section. So yeah, so it'll be financial data conference there.
Cool.
Cool.
Nice. Thank you, Jen.
So lots of goodies going on for November. You won't stay bored. I know I will be sitting in front of that Nodes playlist waiting for the videos to trickle out so that I can watch, catch up
Oh,
on
yeah.
everything that I missed at the end of October.
What do you think, guys? Should we talk another half hour or so about Gen AI and vector indexes?
We probably could.
We could just keep going. Maybe more next month.
Yeah, next month. All right.
Cool.
Well, we hopefully will talk to you all very soon in another installment of Graph Stuff. But until then, enjoy all the graphy content coming your way.
Thank you, everyone.
Halloween.